Dear Medyascope viewers, welcome to This Week in Turkey. This evening, our guest will be Professor Ersin Kalaycıoğlu. Professor Kalaycıoğlu will be evaluating US President Joe Biden's recognition of the Armenian genocide, Turkey's response to this recognition, and how the relation between the two countries will be impacted in light of this development. Professor Kalaycıoğlu will also provide a historical perspective on Turkey-US relations and assess how Turkey's foreign policy in the last 10 years has led to the deterioration of Turkey's relations with its neighbors, the EU, and the United States. Our interview with Professor Kalaycıoğlu will be given at the end of our broadcast. Let us first look at the developments of the week. We begin our bulletin with the pandemic-related developments. First, let's take a look at the numbers.
According to the data released by the Ministry of Health, as of April 29, the total number of cases has reached 4,788,700, and the death toll has become 39,737. On Monday, President Erdogan announced that Turkey would be entering a 3-week full lockdown to curb the spread of the virus, which had hit record highs in recent weeks. The full lockdown began yesterday, April 29th, and will be ongoing until May 17th. Here are the details.
Speaking to reporters following a 3-hour cabinet meeting in the capital Ankara, President Erdogan said all workplaces will suspend their activities or shift to work-from-home models during the restrictions, except those excluded by the Interior Ministry. Production and manufacturing facilities, construction sites, hotels and other touristic facilities are among those exempted from the lockdown. All citizens are required to stay indoors unless making a necessary shopping trip or seeking urgent medical treatment. Schools will move to online learning, intercity public transits will run at 50% capacity, and travel between the provinces will be prohibited. At a time when Europe is entering a phase of reopening, we must rapidly reduce our numbers of cases to less than 5,000 not to be left behind, Erdogan said. Otherwise, we will face consequences in every field from tourism to trade and education. The new measures will cover the entire holy Muslim month of Ramadan, as well as 3 days of the Eid holiday. While a full lockdown was imminent to slow down the recent surge in cases, the measures announced were highly criticized as more than 60% of workers in the country are exempt from the measures. Moreover, the government hasn't announced any economic support package for those who will have to stay at home. The Turkish Medical Association stated that the new measures were not aimed at protecting public health, as employees in various sectors would continue to work, and no solution was offered against the impoverishment of the people who were going to stay at home. While the Ministry of Interior circular specifying the lockdown conditions makes no mention of alcohol sales, 2 days after Erdogan's announcement, the Interior Ministry said that alcohol sales will be banned, prompting outrage nationwide due to the government's increasing interference in people's lives. Thousands have been asking authorities to reveal the reason behind such a ban since it had no legal foundation. Social media users started a campaign using the hashtag #Don'tTouchMyAlcohol, with more than 36,000 people commenting on the issue. Turkey first started bans on alcohol sales in December as part of COVID-19 restrictions, some 9 months after the pandemic first emerged in the country. In other news, on Wednesday, April 28th, Health Minister Fahrettin Koca said that there will be a scarce supply of COVID-19 vaccines over the next 2 months, but that the shortfall should in time be overcome with the new procurements and ultimately by production in Turkey. He also announced that Turkey has signed a deal for 50 million doses of Russia's Sputnik V COVID-19 vaccine, which will start arriving next month and should help address a short-term fall in supply. Turkey has, until now, been administering China's Sinovac vaccine and Pfizer's BioNTech vaccine. Koca also revealed that 5 people have been diagnosed with the COVID-19 variant first identified in India, adding that the cases were isolated and being monitored.
On April 24th, United States President Joe Biden recognized the killing of Armenians in 1915 as genocide. The day before the announcement, President Biden held a phone call with President Erdogan, marking it as the first official phone call between the two. President Erdogan's lack of effective response to the US recognition of the Armenian genocide was heavily criticized by the opposition.
April 24 marks the annual commemoration of Armenian Genocide Remembrance Day. On the occasion of the remembrance, the US President Joe Biden officially recognized the Armenian genocide with the statement that read, "Each year on this day, we remember the lives of all those who died in the Ottoman-era Armenian genocide and recommit ourselves to preventing such an atrocity from ever again occurring," said Biden. With this statement, Biden became the first US president to recognize the events of 1915 as genocide since Ronald Reagan in 1981. The US is now among the 30 countries that formally recognize 1915 as genocide. France, Germany, Italy, and Canada are among the countries that have formally recognized the Armenian genocide. Biden's declaration follows a non-binding resolution by the US Senate adopted unanimously in 2019 recognizing the killings as genocide. Turkey reacted to the US with denunciation. Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu on Twitter said that Turkey entirely rejects the statement and that it is solely based on populism. The ministry also summoned the US ambassador to Ankara to convey its strong reaction. Along with various Turkish government officials, the Turkish opposition leaders have also condemned Biden's recognition. The only political party that voiced support for the recognition of the 1915 killings as genocide was People's Democratic Party, HDP. President Erdogan's response came later on April 26th in a televised address to the nation. Erdogan said that Biden's announcement opened a deep wound in bilateral relations between the NATO allies and that the comments made were groundless and unfair. İYİ Party chair Meral Akşener criticized Erdogan's comments for lacking seriousness and strength. In a group meeting at the Turkish parliament, Akşener said that,
"As a nation, we were waiting for what the Turkish government will do in response to this injustice. However, it was as if the strong world leader who slams anyone that annoys him had vanished and had been replaced with a Mr. Erdogan who is quite well behaved, quite cute, and quite a darling."
People's Democratic Party MP Garo Paylan, a Turkish-Armenian politician, also commemorated April 24th. Paylan was critical of the fact that there are still streets and schools named after Talat Pasha, who was the Ottoman Empire's Minister of Interior during the incidents of 1915. In a response to the MP Paylan's statement shared in a tweet, an independent MP, Ümit Özdağ, insulted Paylan in a series of tweets. Özdağ said that, "Impudent provocateur man, if you're not content, go to hell. Talat Pasha didn't expel patriotic Armenians, but those who stabbed us in the back like you. When the time comes, you'll also have a Talat Pasha experience, and you should have it." Over this, Garo Paylan called Özdağ a fascist and filed a complaint against him. Paylan filed the complaint under the Penal Code articles of incitement of enmity, insults and threats, and incitement to commit a crime. There has been a heated debate on whether the killings of the 1915 should be classified as a genocide. Turkey acknowledges the killings of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire during World War I, but denies that the killings were systematically orchestrated and constitutes a genocide. Armenia has been appealing to the US and other countries to recognize the killings as a genocide because they believe that the happenings of 1915 were specifically targeted at the Armenian population.
On April 26, the first trial of the Kobani case was held in Ankara after 6 years of waiting. In the 22nd Heavy Penal Court, 108 members of the People's Democratic Party went on trial for their alleged involvement in the Kobani protests of 2014, for which 28 members are already serving prison sentences.
The 108 current and former members of the People's Democratic Party, including the jailed former co-chair Selahattin Demirtas, are charged with offenses including homicide and attacking the integrity of the state. The prosecution is due to their alleged roles in inciting the deadly protests of 2014, which were sparked over ISIS taking over the Syrian border town of Kobani. The protests were held against the Turkish government's failure to militarily intervene in ISIS attacks on the predominantly Syrian Kurdish town of Kobani. 38 people were killed during the protests. HDP says that the Kobani trial is politically motivated and is the latest in a severe government crackdown against them. HDP co-chair Mithat Sancak spoke outside the courthouse, saying that the trial is politically motivated. As the Turkish government vigorously defends the prosecution, claiming the defendants are accountable for the deaths in the protests, HDP says the Turkish police are to blame for the deadly violence. The opening trial got off to a tense start when the defendant's lawyers walked out of the courtroom, objecting to the court's refusal to allow some of the lawyers inside. The lawyers who were inside the courtroom said that the room was filled with riot police who were made to sit at the attorney's seats. In accordance, the HDP defendants refused to respond to identification questions without their lawyers present, saying their right to defense was being violated. They reacted to the panel of judges by protesting with a long-lasting clapping. During the trial, attorneys of former and imprisoned HDP co-chairs Selahattin Demirtas and Figen Yüksekdağ and of the imprisoned politician Sebahat Tuncel requested for their clients to take the floor and make statements. However, the requests were rejected by the court board due to non-compliance with the procedures and concluded that the request for recusal by the defendants be submitted in written form. When the indictment was read out by the court board, it sparked reactions as the attorneys protested by hitting the tables. Former HDP co-chair Selahattin Demirtas, who was not allowed to speak at the trial, connecting from the prison in Edirne where he is held to the courtroom via Segbis, held a paper in his hand which read, "Where is $128 billion?" referring to the missing reserves of the central bank brought into the agenda by the opposition. The next hearing will be held on May 3rd.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on Monday pointedly blamed sexism for her banishment to a sofa during the meeting with President Erdogan and Charles Michel on April 6th in Ankara.
I am the first woman to be president of the European Commission. I am the president of the European Commission. And this is how I expected to be treated when visiting Turkey 2 weeks ago.
Speaking before lawmakers in the European Parliament, von der Leyen said she could not find any justification in the European treaties that explained why she was relegated to a nearby sofa while President Erdogan and Michel sat in stately chairs. Would this have happened if I had worn a suit and a tie? She asked, also pointing out that she did not see any shortage of chairs in previous meetings of EU top leaders with Erdogan. It happened because I'm a woman, von der Leyen concluded. The controversy erupted after a clip surfaced online of a confused von der Leyen uttering, as Michel took the seat next to Erdogan, while she was left standing nearby. For the first time, von der Leyen on Monday explained how she felt in the moment, directing her comments especially to the female members of this house. "I am sure you know exactly how I felt," she said. "I felt hurt and I felt alone as a woman and as a European." Turkey insists that the EU's own protocol requests were applied, but the European Council head of protocol said his team did not have access during their preparatory inspection to the room where the incident happened. Moreover, in an email, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Tanju Bilgiç denied that von der Leyen was slighted because of her gender, stating that Turkey does not apply separate protocol arrangements according to the gender of the person holding office. Bilgiç added that it is regrettable that this event, which originates from internal EU political fights, is still being used as material for political debates and is being associated with gender discrimination.
The founder of Turkish cryptocurrency exchange Todex, Faruk Fatih Özer, has fled the country with about $2 billion on April 20th. An investigation has been launched into the company over aggravated fraud and forming a criminal organization.
Özer released a statement on his Instagram on April 22nd, hours after reports of his disappearance. Reports that surfaced on April 22nd of me leaving the country with $2 billion belonging to 391,000 people are completely untrue, Özer said. The same day, a picture of Özer at the Istanbul airport surfaced. Istanbul police said Özer had flown to the Albanian capital, Tirana, on April 20th. The Thodex cryptocurrency trading platform, which had been handling daily cryptocurrency trade worth hundreds of millions of dollars, said on its website on April 22nd it would be closed for 4 or 5 days due to a sale process. But users who have not been able to withdraw money or access their accounts voiced concern on Twitter that they may have been defrauded. The Financial Crimes Investigation Board, MASAK, has since blocked the company's accounts. On April 23rd, prosecutors issued arrest warrants for 78 people suspected of being linked to the platform, with police detaining 62 of them. Interpol issued a red notice for the company's CEO, with Turkey calling for his extradition from Albania. Albanian police on April 27th raided a house in Tirana in which Özer was believed to be hiding. The operation, which was held in cooperation with the Turkish police, led to the detention of 2 Albanians who are facing charges of aiding Özer.
Villagers have been resisting a stone quarry project in İkizdere district of the Black Sea province of Rize for a week now, often confronted with gendarmerie. In order to prevent the construction from ensuing, the villagers have filed a lawsuit against the project and started to keep a watch in the area in a bid to save a dense forest area considered one of the most precious natural beauties of Turkey's northeast.
The project commenced on April 21st after a presidential decree for urgent expropriation in the İşkencedere Valley area was issued. Approximately 16 million tons of stones are planned to be dug and purchased from the region. On April 23rd, the villagers' access to the valley was blocked off, yet the villagers have been protesting the project by finding their way around the gendarmerie barricades despite the continuous attacks by the gendarmerie. Moreover, construction machines devastated the villagers' beehives and broke water pipes. On April 25th, soldiers entered the properties of villagers to enforce the coronavirus lockdown and prevent people from going to the project sites. Several people were detained. Footage showing gendarmerie's intervention against the villagers drew reaction on social media as the hashtag İkizdere taş ocağı olmasın, there should be no quarry in İkizdere, started the trend on Twitter on April 25th. The company undertaking the destruction is Cengiz Construction, a company that has close ties to the government and has undertaken numerous infrastructure projects over the past decade.
Some of Turkey's biggest banks are reluctant to finance President Erdogan's planned Istanbul Canal due to environmental concerns and the investment risks hanging over the massive construction project, according to a report by Reuters, who spoke with 4 unnamed senior bankers.
According to Reuters, 2 of the sources said a global sustainability pact that 6 of Turkey's top banks have signed was a barrier to funding the Canal Istanbul. 6 Turkish banks, including Garantibank, İşbank, and Yapı Kredi, have signed the UN-backed Principles for Responsible Banking Framework, which calls on signatories to avoid harming people and the planet. Definitely, we don't want to give a loan to this kind of project because of the environmental issues, a second senior banker told Reuters, adding that signatory banks must abide by the UN-backed Sustainability Pact. The sources say taking on such a large project could limit their capacity to carry out further loan syndications, while there was also a risk the project could be torpedoed at a later stage. Istanbul's mayor, opposition politicians, engineers, environmental activists, and many of the city's inhabitants have long been opposing the project on environmental grounds, saying it would destroy a marine ecosystem and resources that supply almost a third of the city's fresh water. The government expects to break ground in June on the canal, which would connect the Black Sea to the north with the Marmara Sea to the south, running 45 kilometers through marshland, farms, and towns on the western edge of the city. In 2019, the canal's price tag was estimated at 75 billion liras in a government report.
Turkey became the top receiver of Europe's plastic waste in 2020. In comparison to 2019, Turkey purchased 13% more waste this year. 241 trucks of plastic waste per day were sent from Europe, which equates to 659,000 tons of daily waste. The amount of plastic waste coming from Europe increased 196 times in the last 16 years.
According to Greenpeace, Eurostat, and UK Office for National Statistics, Turkey has imported 659,960 tons of plastic waste from the European Union and from the United Kingdom. With that, Turkey has satisfied 28% of Europe's waste exports. The first 5 countries that have sent the most plastic waste to Turkey are the UK, Belgium, Germany, Netherlands, and Slovenia. 1/3 of the 659,000 tons of plastic waste that Turkey imported in 2020 was from the United Kingdom. But the final destination of Europe's plastic waste used to be China, along with Turkey. However, the Chinese government banned the plastic waste import in 2018, and the new and most important address for the wastes became Turkey. Regarding this issue, Greenpeace has warned Turkey to prevent its environment from becoming a plastic wasteland. The Greenpeace Mediterranean Biodiversity Project leader Nihan Temiz Ataş said that Turkey is swiftly moving away from its zero waste goal as the plastic waste imports are exponentially increasing every day. Ataş called for the import to be immediately banned. Greenpeace Mediterranean has started the Turkey Should Not Become a Wasteland project in 2020. As a result of this project, the Ministry of Environment and Urbanization has lowered the waste import quota of the country. However, the waste intake continues to grow despite the lowering of quota. Greenpeace Mediterranean Biodiversity Project leader Nihan Temiz Ataş commented on this environmental issue in a Medyascope broadcast and said the following.
This situation tells us that the regulation mechanisms need to be tightened. Along with that, the Environment and Urbanization Minister has emphasized that the goal for January is zero waste import. We request that the ministry immediately execute this undertaking by explaining the plastic waste import ban action plan and by increasing the mechanisms of regulation and transparency.
This evening, our guest is Professor Ersin Kalaycıoğlu, a political scientist and professor of political science at Sabancı University.
Hello, Professor Kalaycıoğlu. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning. I also wish you a good day.
Thank you, you too. So, US President Joe Biden has recognized the Armenian genocide. Were you surprised by this announcement? In the past, there have been other presidents who have promised to recognize the 1915 killings as genocide, and Ronald Reagan did in 1981. But why do you think that this happens now? And what does this say about the status of the two countries' relationship?
Just as you mentioned, on the 24th of April 1981, President Reagan had uttered the G word, or genocide, depicting the events of 1915 in the First World War, in the war zone between the Russian army's onslaught into the Ottoman Empire and the Ottoman army's resistance in Eastern Anatolia. Therefore, it's not the first time this concept was used by an American president. But there are 40 years in between. In this period, US presidents had used the Armenian term, Metzgern, to refer to this incident, to these incidents of April 1915. And of course, there had been many arguments back and forth in between, not only in the United States, but also in Europe and elsewhere on this issue. First of all, I would like to mention to you that these debates and these arguments back and forth have been continuing in the academia, in the media and the press, and in political circles. Certain legislatures around the world have accepted these events as defined by Presidents Reagan and Biden in the recent years, between 1981 and now. Others have not. And the decisions of these legislatures may only be considered as political decisions. They did not necessarily rest on any new findings that happened in recent years pertaining to this matter. And the initial investigations, which took place in 1920s by the British Empire at the time, which held prisoners from the Ottoman Mejlis, or Ottoman Assembly, Royal Assembly, at the time, the legislature, which they raided and arrested in March 1920, and established a prison and a court in the island of Malta, and assigned a prosecutor to this case. Prosecutor investigated this case, for about 2 years and found no evidence indicating to some kind of by the British Empire at the time, and also became a point of view of the British government since the 1920s. And these people who had been taken into custody and tried in Malta were returned in a hostage exchange with the Ankara government, then not Turkish Republic at the time. And this issue was settled in the court in one way or another at that time. As far as I can tell, new evidence on this had not been unearthed, except in a very recent trial, which took place in the European Court of Justice, European Court of Human Rights, European Court of Human Rights of the Council of Europe, of which Turkey is a member, and so is Armenia. This court was presented by findings that came from the Russian archives, which are now more accessible after the end of the Cold War. And on that basis, the European Court of Human Rights decided in 2015 in a case, Perinček versus Switzerland, that there is no court decision defining the events of 1915 as a genocide. Therefore, Perinček's arguments of denying genocide is not a crime and cannot be punished for that. And it's not Holocaust denial or denial of genocide by any understanding of the term. So this is the only major recent legal development that has taken place. I'm not so sure whether the US will consider the decision of the European Court of Human Rights as a major decision or not, but as you would know, and those who would be listening to us may know, that the 1948 convention, which came into effect as of 1951, clearly stipulates that the legal decision on whether a mass killing is a genocide or not can be passed by the International Court of Justice in Den Haag in Netherlands. And that's the only court that is authorized to make that kind of a judgment. And there is no decision on this issue by that court, although approximately 106 years passed since 1915. But in the meantime, there has been a lot of political action going on, especially back and forth, not only in the United States, but also in Europe. There have been a lot of lobbying on both sides. The Armenian diaspora has been promoting this issue in political circles and want to get as much political capital out of it as possible. And they have been throwing their weight behind various legislators and try to influence them to make these decisions in the European parliaments, also in the US Congress. In general, they have been quite successful. Also influencing the curricula of secondary education, also academic writing, in which these events, they try to put them in the light of genocide literature and want to raise awareness to them as genocide and create general acceptability for it among the people in general. And they have been very successful at doing so. In that process, the events have started to change description over time. For example, on the 29th of October 2019, the 116th Congress had a resolution, Resolution 926, in which the US Congress refers to the events of 1915 through 1923, a totally different phenomenon now, as Armenian genocide. Now, this makes the issue even more complicated, simply because there is no such event as 1915 through 1923 that continues for that 7-8 year period of systematic mass killing of Armenians and what have you. 1923 is the year in which Turkish Republic is established. It's also the year when the Treaty of Lausanne was signed, ratified by all countries, but not by the United States Senate. So that's a very interesting development so far as this issue is concerned. I'm sure that there is no way that this can be accepted by any Turkish political party in government or out of government as a definition of any mass killing, let alone genocide, for this period. Events of April 1915, the deportation of Armenian population from the war zone in which Russian army and the Ottoman army were fighting several battles between the end of 1914, December 1914, all the way through 1917, when the Russian Revolution took place and the Russian army deserted mainly and left their positions and went back to Russia. As a result of which, it became possible for the Armenians who were left behind to get the weapons left behind by the Russians and continue fighting in uniforms of the Armenian military with the Ottoman troops or non-disbanded Ottoman troops after the Mudros Treaty of 30th of October 1918. And therefore, the events are enormously complicated because of the characteristic of the war, the international war, the First World War, in which Russia and the Ottoman armies were fighting each other in Eastern Anatolia, where large proportions of the Armenians were living in the battle zone. Mm-hmm. That complicates the matter first. Secondly, this was an area which was declared as autonomous by the Ottoman Empire before the war. And this autonomous area, which was to be managed by the Armenians themselves in their own governance, looked as if a zone which was deeply influenced by ideas of nationalism, Armenian nationalism, and there were various Armenian nationalist organizations which had taken root in this territory. One of them, the Dashnak Sütun, was especially most effective in organizing themselves, and they were fully armed by the time the First World War erupted. And they were supported by the Russian military as well, simply because Russia had been following a policy of reaching warm water ports for a long time, since the beginning of the 18th century. And they were pushing into Ottoman territory to grab some kind of shoreline on the Mediterranean, because their seas have been packed with ice in winter, and that had, of course, a dysfunctional influence on foreign trade in Russia. So they were following a policy of grabbing as much land from the Ottoman Empire as possible, and they thought that this was an opportune moment for Russia to move towards the Mediterranean, and they seemed to be helped in this endeavor by the organized Dashnak groups, which had taken up arms and had started a secessionist movement from the Ottoman Empire, which may be considered more or less like the secession of the South from the Union in the US, sort of a act of a civil war. So there was a international war, First World War, and in that war there was a sort of a smaller civil war happening at the same time in Eastern Anatolia. And
Professor,
in this,
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, just considering the limited time that we have, and I realize that there's a really extensive kind of historical background that is important for both us and our viewers to understand, that requires an in-depth historical research and so forth. But just because of our limited time, I'd really like to ask you how Biden's decision to recognize the April 1915 events as genocide will impact the Turkish-American relations, considering that there's also other issues which have still not been resolved. The S-400s issue, there's a Halkbank case that is ongoing. How is all of this going to kind of impact the relations between the two countries in the near future?
Okay, I'll come to that very, very quickly. What I'm trying to tell you is that this is a very complicated set of events which culminated in huge loss of life by Armenians and by the Muslims living in that area. And that is how it is perceived in Turkey. Not only a particularly painful and horrible set of events influencing Armenians, but also the Muslims in that area. And in fact, there are many complexities of the issue of these various wars intertwined in each other, resulting in a very messy set of events. And it's very difficult to decipher all of these. And therefore, the perceptions in Turkey, when these depictions are made and offers are made to recognize the Armenian part of it only, without paying any sensitivity to what happened to the Muslims. Somewhere around 500,000 Muslims perished in this process by the actions of the Russian army and also by the actions of groups such as the Dashnaks, not only the Armenians who died. And forget about the Muslims, focus only on the Armenians, then stretch the dates from 1915 to 1923. And this becomes an unacceptable set of announcements for Turkey to accept. So now the president's decision to use this term, genocide, to refer to the events of 1915 only pertinent to Armenia, has taken place without any new knowledge on this issue being forth by any academic work or any court decision, except for the decision of the European Court of Human Rights. I'm not so sure whether that is in any way pertinent to the US case. So this decision can only be considered as a political decision by the president to influence relations between the US and the Turkish government today at the governmental level. And the two governments are far apart from each other. After the 2020 elections in the US, US government has become a liberal government, espousing liberal values, and these liberal values are reflected on the foreign policy of the United States. In fact, candidate Biden had declared that he would follow a foreign policy that is based on values, on democracy, rule of law, etc. Now, that is the position of the US. So far as the Turkish government is concerned, Turkish government is a far-right government, just like many other governments in Europe, such as Hungary or Poland, or say in the Middle East, such as Israel. It's a right-wing government and far-right government, which is acting as a coalition of two political parties. One is an Islamicist conservative religious party, and the other is a ethnic nationalist Turkish party, National Action Party. So their policies and where they stand on foreign policy is far removed from President Biden's government and the values, and therefore there is a huge value clash between the policies, foreign policies of Turkey and foreign policies of the US. One is liberal, left-wing, the other is far-right, nationalist and religious, following a completely different kind of trajectory. But at the same time, Turkey is a member of NATO since 1952. And Turkey is, of course, has a lot of relationships with the United States in this period, many treaties signed in between, therefore an ally of the United States. But at the same time, Turkish government has been developing closer relationship with more authoritarian governments of the right wing in Europe, also in Eurasia with Russia. And that seems to be creating several differences of opinion between the current US government and the Turkish government in relations with Russia. And these relations are also complicated by Turkey's reactions to the developments that have been occurring in Syria, the Syrian civil war. Huge number of refugees have arrived in Turkey, and the Turkish foreign policy towards Syria has also taken into consideration a Kurdish insurgency implicating Turkey as well, and the role of a terror organization, PKK, which has been taking part in these developments, is also a sensitive chord over which Turkish and American foreign policies have also sharply diverged. For the US considers the political organizations of the Kurds in north of Syria, YPG and PYD, as allies, whereas Turkey considers them as existential threat and wants to treat them accordingly. And these policies, these divergences, obviously create conflict between Turkey and the US. And Turkey's rapprochement with Russia created a missile crisis in which Turkey acquired a long-range missile, S-400s, from Russia, which US had sanctioned in the past, the Russian firms producing these missiles due to the CAATSA law, countering adversaries of America through Sanctions Act. And this has now been applied to Turkey also, which complicates the relations even further. And therefore, there are lots of issues to be negotiated between highly divergent political ideologies of political parties in government, in Turkey and in the US. And this has come to the limelight by this decision that the conflict will continue for a while longer. But there is some kind of opportunity for them to meet and talk in greater detail in the NATO summit in June. That is also revealed. So the Turkish government's reactions to Mr. Biden's declaration was somewhat low profile to enable Turkey to continue negotiating with the US in NATO over these series of issues, and also further complications that pertain to Iranian sanctions through various financial dealings of a Turkish public bank, Halkbank, which is a court case continuing in the US. And that has also further complicated the issue, or the relations in general between Turkey and the US, which has reached a very low point, a nadir, since 1952. There have been oscillations in these relations. There have been periods where there were something like strategic partnership between the two countries, and there were times of falling apart. In early March 2003, for example, during the Iraq War, there was a falling apart. Earlier, over the Cyprus issue, there was a falling apart of these two countries and diverging in their foreign relations and clashing and conflicting, an arms embargo in 1975 through 1978 after the Cyprus issue. So we have now reached a point where again, the relations are at a low point, and whether there can be any further improvement in these relations is for us to see. But the conditions in which the governments are operating in their own countries with domestic politics and domestic political concerns also make them move in opposite directions. And therefore, it looks as if these relations are not that easy to mend in a very short period of time.
Yes, and I mean, you mentioned it a little bit earlier when, talking about Turkey's reaction to this statement, to this announcement, where Erdogan's response was considered to be muted despite the characteristics of the current government, which you also wonderfully summarized, being nationalistic, conservative, and Islamist. The expectations, also considering Erdogan as a character, I mean, as a personality who tends to kind of, be quite open with his, statements and so forth. Yet here his reaction was very muted, and he was essentially criticized by the opposition. I mean, Kılıçdaroğlu said that Erdogan had become a security concern, and he compared him to a cat. Meral Akşener, İYİ Party chair, described Erdogan's response as cute, calling him a darling. So this is very interesting, kind of compared to the expectation of what Turkey's response would have been and what it actually was. But I guess, as you mentioned, Professor, this is also a strategy to keep the relations going, and with the hopes that things might get better by the time the June meeting occurs.
Well, this also happens at a time when the foreign policy of the current government in Turkey has changed its character by moving away from soft power, exuding soft power throughout the regions that Turkey has been neighbor to. And there are three very critical regions: Southeastern Europe, the Balkans, on the west, Eastern Mediterranean to its south, Middle East, and also there's Transcaucasus, southern parts of Caucasus, and therefore, and also the Black Sea to the north. So Turkey seems to be in the hub of highly turbulent and volatile regions of the world, and had been following a foreign policy based on peace and upholding international law, and using soft power, diplomacy, cultural relations, economic relations, especially trade with neighbors, as a major part of her foreign policy with her neighbors in all of these regions and beyond: Europe, United States, NATO, a Council of Europe, and Turkey has now been negotiating with the European Union for full membership, which seems to be on hold for the time being, for all practical purposes. Now, this kind of foreign policy came under the influence of this current right-wing government, which has gone from moderate right in the early 2000s to extreme right in the eyes of the voters. I do a lot of voting studies, and recently published these findings in a University of Michigan Press book called Fragile but Resilient, with a colleague, Ali Çarkoğlu, and analyze them. And then we have data indicating that the people consider this government as an extreme right-wing government. And this government changed the content of Turkish foreign policy from one based on peace and diplomacy and soft power to one that is based on, increasingly based on hard power, using military force to exude influence. Military force in northern Iraq and northern Syria, for understandable reasons, to somehow prevent the events of those areas to spilling over into Turkey through the activities of terrorist groups. So to a certain extent, that was a necessity. But now they seem to have liked this very much, but in this process, decided to change its foreign policy to fit more to its ideology. And it began to use ideological foreign policy promoting Islamism, for example, to a great extent, therefore found itself saber rattling with Israel, for example. Turkey and Israel had a very functional relationship in the area for a very long period of time. Instead, now the two countries are in a conflict situation. The same was true for Egypt, for example. And the same was true for Syria until the Arab uprisings after 2011. There were all very functional, very good relations, and Turkey could even talk to both sides of conflict, Arab-Israeli conflict, Palestinian-Israeli conflict, with the same kind of reliability and credibility. That is now completely gone. Instead, we alienated, through this government's highly ideological policy, all of these countries. Now that they are trying to mend bridges, more recently, in the last couple of months, with both Israel and Egypt, and also alienated other powerful Arab countries such as Saudi Arabia in this process. And relations between the two countries have deteriorated, especially after the Khashoggi affair, as you very well know. So Turkey is now pretty much isolated and alienated from all these neighbors to her south and to her west. And this has given an image of being relatively weak. This is therefore being alone in isolation and alienation led to the impression that Turkey is becoming weak, and Turkey cannot use effectively its soft power influences any longer. So this has given a chance for the neighbors to promote their own national agendas against Turkey, both in the case of Greece and Armenia. Both of them have now launched diplomatic offensives against Turkey in the venues where they are more powerful, both in the US, also in the EU. So we now observe Turkey being pressured both by the US and European member countries, EU member countries, and also by the EU from time to time, threatened by sanctions of various kinds or sanctions imposed upon it, because it's believed to be in a weak state, and it is in a weak position and ready to give concessions of one kind or another. And that is, of course, further depreciating the values of these alliances in the eyes of the government in Turkey, and also creating these kinds of criticisms that the opposition makes for the kind of foreign policy decisions that the government has made, for this policy of isolationism, being alone, without not using its alliance relations effectively, not explaining its policies to its allies effectively, not persuading them as Turkey used to do 10 years earlier or even before, when Turkey's resources were not even at this current level. Pandemic and its economic problems also deteriorated the Turkey's stance so far as its economic recovery is concerned, and that has also contributed to this overall image, is that Turkey is becoming weaker, and now is the time for the solution of many of these issues that are pertinent to various theaters, such as the Aegean natural gas reserves in the East Med, relations with Turkey on the east with Armenia, etc. Now all of these countries have come to believe that now is the time to move against Turkey, pressure Turkey, and get more concessions, and either resolve their conflicts or move Turkey back in the positions of negotiations as much as possible, and further use this image of Turkey in their broader relations with other European members, NATO allies, US, Russia, and others. And therefore, the declaration made by Mr. Biden also happened to occur under this international context, where the various allies of the US internationally seems to be suggesting to the US to help them resolve their conflicts with a weaker Turkey more effectively and efficiently right now. Also, domestic pressures coming from various lobbies on the Biden administration for the ethnic relations of the Democrat Party, of course, in the US politics, also provides them with an opportunity to reach the ear of an eager president who's ready to listen under these circumstances for his domestic political relations perspective as well. So all of them seem to be meeting in a direction, producing an opportune time for this kind of a move by President Biden. And this also bodes ill for the foreign policy that the current government has been following in Turkey for the last decade or so, especially since 2009, more so in 2010s, beginning with 2010 up until now in the last 10 to 12 years.
Professor Ersin Kalaycıoğlu, thank you so much for having joined us and for this very informative talk. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. See you next Friday at 9 p.m. Good night.